Merry Christmas. I am terribly sorry that we all can't be together today to worship, but given the weather and the road conditions, we thought it best if we not meet this morning. Uh, but this is one of those holidays like Easter that it seems appropriate that we be together. So I'm glad that you're listening to this message. I hope it adds something to your Christmas day, and I certainly hope that you have a blessed and happy Christmas. This is an interesting holiday that we celebrate the birth of Jesus because Jesus is the greatest gift that we've ever received. There's nothing on earth that could be given to us that is as important as what he has already given us. But the world hasn't seen it that way. And they didn't see it through Jesus's life. It wasn't even apparent in Jesus's conception. Now, if you think about this for a minute, Jewish girls would get betrothed when they were in their early teens. And the boys generally were in their late teens or early 20s. And the betrothal was a binding contract. To the Jews, the betrothal was more important than the actual wedding because the betrothal is where everything was bound. Now, until a year had passed after the betrothal, the girl would stay in the home of her mom and dad. And then after a year, they would have a wedding ceremony, and she would move into the house of her husband. But the marriage wasn't binding until they had moved into that house together and had intimate relations with each other. So if you've ever read Matthew, and Matthew says that Joseph and Mary were married, and then you read Luke, and Luke says that they were just betrothed, that's not a contradiction. Matthew was expressing the general sense. Once the betrothal started, you were considered to be married. And then Luke was being a little more specific. But just for a moment, now during the betrothal part of the relationship, they were not to be alone together or have physical contact. So imagine you have a 14 or 15-year-old girl that comes in one day and says, "Hey, mom and dad, I have some great news. I'm going to have a baby, but I'm still a virgin." Now, I think their reaction would probably be very similar to what our reaction is, which is really, really. I doubt that many people believed her. And we know for a fact, based on Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 18, that Joseph didn't believe her. Now, some people have said, well, Joseph could have had Mary stoned. Now, under the old law, that was true, but the Romans had abolished any of the death penalty practices, so he really couldn't have had her stoned, but he could have humiliated her. And it says in Matthew 1, starting in verse 18, that Joseph was a righteous man, and he didn't want to inflict her with any more shame than she was already going to go through. And he was planning on divorcing her until an angel stopped by and said, "Joseph, everything she is telling you is right." And so he decided to go through with the wedding. But now think about this. You have a young woman and a young man. They're betrothed to be married. The young woman comes in and says, "Hey, I'm pregnant, but I haven't had relations with anybody." And then the man she is going to marry says, "Oh, yes, I believe her, and I'm going to go ahead and marry her." Now, once again, probably the people around them thought very similar to what we're thinking. Sure, yeah, you're just going to happen to go ahead and marry her when she's gotten pregnant from someone else. Most people are thinking, those two, they got together and fooled around. But all of that goes to show just how controversial the birth of Jesus was. Now, this wasn't the way that their Messiah was supposed to be born. You know, the Messiah was supposed to be this great king like David or Solomon that brings glory back to Israel. But the Jews had really stopped looking for the Messiah. You know, the wise men come from the east to see Jesus. And these wise men are reading books like Daniel and the minor and major prophets. And they've put together all these signs that the Messiah is coming. And when they see the signs begin to happen, they immediately come so that they can meet this king. Yet the Jews are supposed to be the experts in Jewish law. And they're not looking for the Messiah. When the wise men come to King Herod and say, "Where is this king that we may worship him?" Herod immediately calls the priests together and says, "Hey, where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" And they instantly answer and say, "In Bethlehem." They even quote the scripture. So they had the same signs, but they weren't looking. You'll notice in the entire story of the birth of Jesus, in that entire narrative, not one religious leader shows up to see him when he is a baby. Not one. And so Jesus was not what was expected. Not in the manner of his conception, not in the manner of his birth. You think they wanted their Messiah, you know, his birth story to include a manger, that he was put in a feeding trough, and then the Jews were no longer looking for their Messiah. And then when Jesus moves into adulthood, it doesn't really get any better. Because here is a man with no job, no home, lived off of the goodness of others. He hung around and spent his free time with people of questionable character. And you think they're just going to say, "Oh yeah, this is the Messiah." Imagine Jesus showing up today. Now, a lot of us have thought maybe in the past that, man, if I would have been around in Jesus' time, I would have followed him. So imagine Jesus being here today, a man with no job, no home, who's living off the goodness of others and hanging around with questionable people. Not only would most of us not have followed him, we really wouldn't even want him in our church. And Jesus was not accepted by the Jewish leaders as the Messiah, even though they had all the clues for his coming. Over 350 prophecies about who the Messiah would be. And not one time did one of those guys sit down and say, "Oh, wait, guys, wait a minute. This might be the right guy." They were so adamant about proving he wasn't the Messiah that when it came to the point that they couldn't prove that he was not the Messiah, they decided to kill him. So instead of saying, maybe he is right, maybe he is the Messiah, they said, nope, that can't be right. We have to get rid of him. And why is that? And it's because what Jesus stood for is not what the world understands. You know, Jesus wasn't even accepted as the Messiah by his own family. And it's because they couldn't understand what it was that Jesus stood for, because what he stands for is not what society craves. It's not what society puts as the most important things. Because Jesus didn't care about money, power, position, fame, possessions. None of that stuff mattered. And when Jesus was asked, what is the most important thing? He said to love God and to love others. Jesus gives value to the meek, to the merciful, to the pure, and the peaceful. He said to give with no expectation of receiving. And he truly offered us the greatest gift that has ever been given. And he offers it free to everyone. Now, doesn't that kind of go against what we teach our children, That the nice kids get presents, and if you're naughty, you get pre-processed diamonds, coal. It's very different from how we think and believe about our own lives. In John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus said, I have come that they might have life and that they might have it to the fullest. That is not what the world believes to be important. And so, why is it so difficult for many people to accept the gift? The greatest gift that's ever been given that Jesus has already offered to us. And it's partly because many of us don't understand how important that gift is. Those of us who have accepted the gift understand that we are predisposed to love, to joy, to peace, to patience, to kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, godliness. These are the things that accepting this gift should put into our hearts. And this gift is so much more than just getting to heaven. This is the gift that allows us hope when life is going badly, when things seem to be going poorly. This is the gift that gives us peace when a family member, someone close to us, dies. This is the gift that shows us and provides us with everything we need to make it through a life that is always going to bring difficulty. This world is not easy. But Jesus said, I have come that you might have life and that you might live that life to the fullest. But that is only possible when you accept this gift that he has given us. This time of the year, from Thanksgiving to Christmas, you see people doing more giving, taking more care of the poor, providing toys for kids that may not get any, providing food and different things for the people that may not have the means to get that. You see people paying it forward. And wouldn't it be great if for the next year we spent our time trying to share that gift the whole year round, just like we would at this time of the year? Imagine a world where everybody did that, where we all continued this spirit of giving, just like we have around this Christmas time, that we remember that it is more precious to give than to receive. And that is the beauty of the gift that you have already been given, that you already have within your grasp, and hopefully you already have imprinted on your heart, that you can live a life that is based on love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, godliness, all of these things that are important to God. I pray that this coming year we practice the very thing that the Spirit encourages us toward. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Merry Christmas.